Trent, thank you so much for joining us today. You have an incredible amount of experience. You've had a tremendous mentor for many years in your career, and all of your skills are my weaknesses, which are, all the underwriting and all the minute details. So I'm really looking forward to having a long chat with you. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Well, thank you. Thank you. My name's Trinity Herrera. I go by Trent usually, but Trinity's my name, so you'll see it on, my email and stuff. I'm the commercial director for Black Tie Real Estate in Fort Worth, Texas. But I do a lot of work in California, Texas, and a lot of other states. I've worked in the syndication and family office real estate industries for 7 years. I've transacted nearly $1 billion of real estate acquisitions and dispositions, some highly creative deals, which I can talk about later. And now I work in group equity and private equity, traditional real estate investments. And I do specialize in the underwriting and value add deals and consultative advice.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a huge broad of experience, which is why we're going to have a few episodes on this podcast alone. But let's start with, syndication foundations. What are the pros and cons of using our money when we can or other people's monies? And we'll dive into each item as needed.
Well, the foundational part is probably maybe the least understood and possibly the worst approached part of a syndication. And that's from the investor side, but sometimes from the sponsor side too. And so I have talking points as to what makes a good syndication foundation. And so I have this term I like to use, which is our PM instead of OPM, and I'll talk about that. Finding the right sponsor is hugely important, but also the right deal. And then underwriting is huge. Understanding what you have is easily 75% of a real estate investment. If you can understand that, then half of the work, 75% of the work is already done. Um, and then accreditation and risk management. And then there's a lot more we'll talk about later, like how to target and what we're targeting for acquisitions. This idea of why, if you live in California, coming to Texas or a similar state with different fundamentals might be good. Um, and other things. So I'll just dive right into it. On the syndication side, this idea of our PM versus OPM is very important to me. It's actually the foundation of, I think, everything I've done over the last decade in real estate. Whenever you're practicing real estate as a licensed agent, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your clients. And sometimes in syndication, those lines can get kind of blurry and scary. And, finding the right sponsor, goes in line with that. You want to find a sponsor who's looking at the money that's being invested is our money. It's not other people's money. I think that's a really disingenuous term that, it's easy to use. Maybe we're talking in business, we're talking to a business partner and saying it, but I don't like the word OPM at all. It's distant. I have a personal relationship with almost all of my investors and clients. And so it's our money and it's your money that you're giving me. And then I use it to make good, sound business decisions for us. And then we all profit at the end. And so that's my number one foundational tip. You want to find a sponsor who's viewing it as our PM because that's a culture.
Mhm.
Our money is collaborative. That just saying it's our money is collaborative in itself. And it's a professional way of looking at it. I think it's so scummy and skeezy feeling when you're talking to someone and they're excited and you say, "How are you going to close the deal?" "Oh, OPM. I'm going
Yeah,
to use other people's money to close this deal. Yeah, I'm going to, get this return." And it just feels selfish. And so this collaboration is highly important. And so that leads into choosing the right sponsor. And every sponsor is going to be so different. Each one of us thinks so differently. My weaknesses and strengths are totally different than yours and than Tom's or anyone in our circle. And I think that the unspoken agreement between all of us is we celebrate that and respect that about each other. And then we help each other with our weaknesses and support each other's strengths. And so I guess the gist is that every single one of us, if it was only us, would do a real estate deal completely differently.
sure.
And finding the right sponsor who aligns with your goals and specializes in what you want and has had success in what you want to have success in is so important. And it's understated because as I talk to people in the real estate industry, I don't know if you've heard this, but most of us start single family purchases. Maybe we're flipping. And then we branch out into multiple units of quadplex of maybe a multifamily is our first step, but we usually hear about multifamily syndications pretty early on in the process of real estate investing.
Yeah,
And those are not for everybody. That appetite is going to be different than somebody who has an appetite for value add industrial. And then there's going to be investors who don't know the difference between the two of those. And so I think that's what we and you do a lot. We work with people to clarify what's their appetite, what are they looking for, what are they comfortable with, and what are they looking for overall. And so that ties into the right deal.
so how do you know, by the way, how do you know that they actually care about your money? Because to me, the investor's money is way more, even more important than my own money. I'm actually
Yeah.
okay, risking my money a little bit more in some deals. But how do you get that out of a new sponsor that you are getting in contact with?
It's a very fair question and it's such a good question. And what's funny is it's one of the actual truly $1 million questions. Like most of us are playing with money in that range, and so that becomes $1 million question. And it's hard. And so I think that you and I and both you and I and others in our group have been hoodwinked before. We've looked at deals that at the surface, the sponsor looked great and everything was above board and the yield was what we wanted and it was our appetite. And something happens, and so to some degree, I think that you can never 100% insulate yourself from a bad egg. You just can't.
True.
But there are signs, you know, and we have this term in the industry, commission breath. That's always a number one red flag. A true servant, someone with a servant mindset, someone who is a holder of money and builder of wealth is not going to have commission breath at all. There's no sizzle in that industry of building generational wealth. The sizzle is we're going to build generational wealth using math and fundamentals. But when there's too much sizzle, that's a red flag. But honestly, for me, the biggest single indicator is the math and the story and history, track record.
Hmm.
And so, we'll talk more about, the underwriting aspect and what you're targeting. But when you have a target of an asset type or class that you're comfortable with, and when you have track record, when you have some under your belt, it's easier to see when something doesn't look or feel the way it should in that industry. And
Yeah.
so I guess I will answer that by saying the single biggest defense is sophistication and experience and maybe even leveraging your friends. There have certainly been friends that have saved me from bad investments just from a second look and talking through a deal.
Hmm. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, we can move into the next bullet point.
Well, I'll start with underwriting. We're talking about the foundation of what makes a syndication or an investment successful. And underwriting is no joke. It's 75% of what makes a syndication work. And it can't be understated how vital understanding underwriting is, not just as a real estate practitioner, but as an investor. My best clients, my best investors, all understand underwriting. And if they don't, they've hired me to help them understand it
Sure.
and to walk them through it so that they can see what I'm seeing on a property. But my God, there are just so many ways that you can look at a property wrong. And I do also believe that not one person should look at a property. There should be a multitude of people and aspects looking at a property, opining, and giving, valid, good criticism and feedback. So, my number one tip when it comes to foundations is dive into underwriting and do your best to understand each deal. It takes years, it takes years. And even then, there are still deals that you see and you struggle, Sometimes you see an underwriting sheet and everything just goes white, but that's the single biggest thing that will mitigate all of your risk. Every risk factor you'll understand better. Your yield, you'll understand more. You'll be less likely to be surprised. And the underwriting and the math is where, you'll see if the deal's truly viable for you or not. So, and that kind of goes along with the risk management side and accreditation. So each one of us has a very different life. We all live such different lives, and we all have different amounts of kids and cars and mortgages and investments. And so we all have these tolerances. And knowing what those are for you through the eyes of someone like you or I, who's been doing this for a long time, is really important. Understanding the level you should be playing at.
Yeah.
How much is too big of a bite off for you? How are you accredited? What's your accreditation level? Those things are all guardrails that are in place to help each investor make good decisions. And so each style of offering that is done is styled differently to either accept less of a wealthy and sophisticated base or not. And
Right.
so through your underwriting and through your own understanding of your life and your position, not biting off more than you can chew and only investing money that you can tolerate losing. Um, I had a line here. I'll find it sometime, but I said it really simply. If real estate investing is not gambling, but if at any point it feels like gambling, you are now gambling. And
Hmm.
so
That's a good
if you
line.
continue, thank you. If you continue investing in real estate after the point that it starts to feel like gambling, that is a call that only you can make. But you should at least know, hey, I'm gambling at this point. And the goal that I work through for is to remove the sense of gambling. And I
Sure.
think that's what a good syndicator does is, that whenever you say value add, that does sometimes mean a level of risk, i.e., we're taking a bit of a gamble. If this happens and if this happens, then we'll get this. And the trick is making sure the ifs work with your risk tolerance and your accreditation and your goals and your sponsor you have good feelings with and you're happy with how they're treating your money. And so if you feel good enough and it doesn't feel like a gamble and you can understand it like your high school math teacher would understand it and also your 5-year-old would understand it and you still feel good about it, it's probably a good investment or at least maybe something worth digging into and understanding more. And so I think between everything, all of that, that sort of summarizes my take on the foundation. It's practical. It's based on the right sponsor, the right deal, good underwriting, working within your lane, and making sure your sponsor is looking at your money like it's our money.
Hmm. On the underwriting aspect, as a passive investor, coming from a passive investor mindset, I have myself as an operator found mistakes in people's underwriting, and these people have been underwriting for years, deals over on top of deals, and I absolutely hate spreadsheets. So if I found that, right, and we discussed that last week when we met in person that you should always have two people underwrite your deal from an operator's perspective to make sure that the numbers match or are very close. But from the investor's perspective, they don't typically get those 600 lines, 10 tabs deep Excel spreadsheets. How would they underwrite that themselves?
That's a good question and a fair one, because that's happened. I've had those exact questions come up before. If you're at that level and you need that sort of a walkthrough, I personally have had those calls hundreds of times in my career. And for me, I like that opportunity because it's a chance for me to talk with you. It's a chance for me to get to know you, and it's a chance for me to show you what I do every day. And it's a chance to build trust. And so for me, that conversation's always welcome. I want to do it over a Zoom call or in person. I want to show you the rationale. And 9 times out of 10, what happens is we're both excited about the deal at the end of the call, or sometimes we're not. And that's okay because now they understand it and they just made an educated choice and they chose to walk away because they weren't comfortable. Totally respect that. But then the people, the 9 out of 10 that get their questions answered and they're totally comfortable with this deal will appreciate the effort. And once you do that once with somebody, I those people don't often come back for more. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, deep dive you go into that takes an hour might get a little, repetitive. But that's part of building the relationship with your sponsor too. Having an accessible sponsor, having a sponsor who will take the time, help you understand, and show you the behind the scenes. Um, all good things.
Yeah, well, at our level, we there is no way we can have a call with each investor for an hour to go into the underwriting in detail. So I guess the investors could ask, "Hey, how many people have you guys underwritten this with?" Right? That could be a way to mitigate that.
Yeah, and I will say those were smaller deals. Those were deals where, it's a smaller, more intimate group of people. And so in some deals, you have 500 people. You have 500 investors.
Yeah,
And there's layers of trust also that have to be built. And so in some cases, the underwriting is going to be confidential. In some cases, you can't release all the underwriting, or in some cases, it would just be too laborious for, a tradesperson to understand and ingest. So there's levels of trust. I also work really hard in an offering to make sure that I'm as transparent and forthcoming with all data as possible. And so reading thoroughly what the syndicators provide, what they do provide, most syndicators, especially ones worth their salt, really genuinely deeply want you to understand the how and why this works.
sure.
And so reading those things, and I think that, we all kind of get a sense for underwriting, but if you're feeling uneasy or you have questions, just reach out to the sponsor. And if even if you can't do a long call, maybe I think that sometimes even just an email into your sponsor or a quick chat or just raising some valid questions, it's always good to start a conversation.